Awesome. Well, first of all, just thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you for the presenters. Our time for this session is really going to help us understand the important role that high quality instructional materials play in our strategy to improve literacy and the outcomes for our kiddos. We are in for a treat. This panel of literacy leaders are going to help us have a view of this topic from many different aspects. We couldn't have a stronger panel to give us a comprehensive view from all levels, really, of our industry, the district, the state, and the national level. So I am so honored that we have Dr. Lily Locks with us, Deputy Commissioner of School Programs at Texas Education Agency, known as TEA. We have Dr. Matt Warford, who is Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning here in Aldine ISD. We're also joined by Kristen McQuillan, who is Project Director at TNTP. And if you're on a previous session, you've heard some of these same people being partners together. So I'm so excited also that we have Janice Lane again on this call. So thank you to the four of you just for your commitment, but we are excited to hear your view on high quality instructional materials.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Amanda's a rock star, in case you haven't already noticed, and I've gotten to work with her and get to know her and our work together too. So welcome everyone. I'll be playing the part of moderator today. So I'll be asking some pointed questions or posing some pointed questions, I should say, to my colleagues here who are going to share their thoughts. A little bit of a run of show. So if you have a question throughout the session, we will have some time at the end for folks who are in the room with us to ask your questions as well. So be sure to type those into the chat throughout the session. Our panelists won't address them as they go, but I'll be storing them and I'll ask them at the end when we have some time for Q&A. I'm going to put in the chat, if you're a Twitter person like I have become over the years, keeping me young, the hashtag we're using today is hashtag literacy matters. I like to go onto Twitter, type hashtag literacy matters into the search bar, then click latest, and you can see what other folks are learning about today and discussing. And you can also, of course, post your own tweets if you're so inclined. So that's kind of the run of show. And at this point, I will allow our panelists to give a brief introduction of who they are, how they got into the work. And so we'll start with you, Dr. Lily Locks, if you can give us a brief intro.
Thank you, Kristen and Amanda. I'm very excited to be here today, so I appreciate it. As folks mentioned, I'm Lily Locks. I'm our Deputy Commissioner of School Programs here at the Texas Education Agency. School programs includes quite a few things, but a few that I think are of relevance to this group are my team has the honor of supporting the State Board of Education in writing and updating our Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills here. I also oversee the statewide assessment program, a small little thing called STAR, and all related instruments, our instructional materials and that adoption for the state. And again, another small initiative you might have heard of called Reading Academies. So I thought those were a few that might be relevant to this group. I'll briefly just add, and I'll share a little bit more about this later in the panel, but I started my career actually as a middle school reading and language arts teacher. And I have lots of personal anecdotes about how different high quality instructional materials would have made my life in that first year. Even though I have a master's in instructional and curriculum leadership and a focus on ELA, I did not learn what I needed to support my readers in that time. And so it's been a big part of my passion and career to focus on how to be a better reading teacher, how to make sure that everyone else has that support and those skills. So that's me.
Thank you so much. Dr. Warford, I'll let you go next.
Well, that's a hard act to follow. But thank you, Lily, for being here. It's just so honored to have you here. I'm Matt Warford. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning here in Aldine ISD. Many of you probably heard the Aldine story about how we got into high quality instructional materials. We've been talking about it all day and led last year's conference. But we're really thrilled to be part of this journey in literacy around the science of reading. We're in year 2 of our implementation with Amplify and Wit and Wisdom and Odell. Really excited to talk to you about that and talk to you about why it matters to us. I oversee our core curriculums, and I work with the media, our director of literacy, in this implementation.
Thank you. And Janice, if you can tell us a little bit about what brought you here, your journey.
Great. Absolutely. Thanks for having me. First of all, I'm super excited not to just be on a panel, but be on a panel with friends and now new friends, meeting you today, Lily. So excited to join the discussion. So started very similar pathway, was a teacher years and years and years ago, very passionate about literacy and followed that throughout my career. Most recently had taught in Anne Arundel County and then landed in the great place of Baltimore City Public Schools for a number of years. So I was in Baltimore for about 11 years. In various roles, including director of literacy, and then led into the executive director of teaching and learning for the past 7 years. So kind of full cycle to the end of that. During that time, I was also supporting Curriculum Matters and really cheerleading all of the great work all of our national partners are doing in literacy and math and science, social studies coming, all of that exciting work, and decided that it was time for the next part for me, which was actually going to a partner. I will always say a partner instead of a publisher because I see Amplify as a differentiator in that field. So in December, I joined Amplify as a regional vice president of partner success. So super excited to be here, continue to learn, and join my colleagues in this work.
And we're excited about your new journey and your new role, Janice. Janice and I celebrated with a lunch over tacos when she took her new job. And so we'll have to do a check-in pretty soon to see how things are going.
Northman tacos don't count as tacos.
That's right. And I did say to her, I was like, you know, I'm a little spoiled from all of my trips to Houston. I gotta say, these are like B+ at best. But I do love tacos, even B+ tacos. I still love them. So we want that to be sort of the tone today, to talk deeply about the work that matters, but then to also find joy in our discussion. And we hope you'll join us in typing your questions and comments into the chat. I'll get us started with the first one, which I'm typing into the chat just in case anybody wants to reference it. And I'll call on you first, Dr. Warford. Why are high quality instructional materials so important when thinking about improving literacy outcomes for students?
And I think that's the key question here. It's one of the most important levers we have in this battle to improve outcomes, because it's about equity. It's about ensuring that every kid gets equal access to the right stuff. And in Aldean, we set that out with our vision framework. And we said that there are 4 tenets that we truly believe every kid should have access to. That's the foundational skills of the science of reading, access to knowledge building curriculums, access to complex text, which is on-level text, and access to writing, daily writing, systematic writing instruction. And by having the high quality instruction materials, we know that our teachers are equipped with those materials the right way. And so we're ensuring that our kids, no matter what room they're in our classrooms, they get to have access to it. It's also high quality materials that they enjoy. It's not the variability of the teacher having to figure out what it is. They're not digging through Pinterest, or teachers pay teachers. And so in this classroom, they might be getting something not of high quality, but in that classroom, they get really high engaging stuff. We're ensuring that they get really rich materials, really engaging stuff in every single one of their rooms. And so that's why it's such an important lever in this battle that we're doing with literacy.
Thank you. Janice, what would you add to that?
I was hoping you'd grab me second instead of third this time, right? We'll have to change the batting order each time.
I'm keeping track.
I love it. I think 1+1 to everything Matt said. I think another thing is, we need to free up teachers to actually do their work because they're masterful at what they do. So being able to really dig in deeply with each student, study, where students are performing, the data, make decisions based on that. Teachers shouldn't have to then build their curriculum from start to finish. So having high quality instructional materials really gives them that freedom and flexibility, while at the same time creating coherence across the system. And I think that is critically important. Matt hit that around equity being an issue, but I think it also holds a central focus to everybody in the district, so that principal supervisors are talking about the same thing the principal is talking about. That's the same thing the CIO is talking about. That's the same professional learning teachers are getting. So for me, I think with HQIMs, it really not only levels the playing field for students, it really sets the agenda for everybody in the district to really focus. And I would also say, you know, it's our job to make it easier for teachers because they work harder than anybody. Our school leaders, all of our folks in districts, we should take that lift away because that's the best thing we can do is allow them to practice, study their craft, get better at what they do, and bring the magic to what they do every day.
Thank you. I love that. Yeah, Lily, what would you add?
I don't know if I'm adding anything new, but I have lots to co-sign from our first two answers. I will say, and some of you may have heard my boss, Commissioner Morath, share in a couple of different presentations. He likes to say, you know, reading is rocket science when he's talking to folks. And I think as Matt articulated, even with their principles, and as Denise mentioned in some of the pieces, making sure that teachers aren't having to do that rocket science piece ahead of all of the incredible things that they already do. And so that they have those materials and aren't having to do the Google and Pinterest, as Matt mentioned. I know I mentioned I wanted to bring my personal story into this one. I think about, you know, my first year teacher self being very well intentioned, but pulling those texts, trying to make sure it's aligned to this standard and this item, and, you know, just really not getting my students what they needed despite all that work. And so I think making sure that our teachers have those tools so that they can really focus on that implementation of those best practices and really focus on getting students exactly what they need. I know we haven't, you know, necessarily started with a definition of high quality instructional materials, but one of the other components that I think, in addition to those pieces around, you know, being based in the science of teaching reading, having knowledge-rich text, having complex text, having the writing, this piece around having supports for the teachers to make sure that they can scaffold and help every student access and meet and use those grade level texts is huge. And I think about all the work that our teachers do to actually provide those supports for students and just the amount that high quality instructional materials can support that and can support the implementation of all of these best practices.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think one of the things we're learning in the field is not all HQIM, as we're calling it an acronym, curriculum, high quality curriculum, however you want to name it, or goes by any other name, right? It's not all created equal. So I think what you're getting at is just this deep understanding of what those materials do, and then doing the things you guys are talking about. Before I ask the next question, I'll just layer in and say a couple of things. Organizationally at TNTP, we can co-sign everything that your panelists are saying. Many of you may be familiar with our last national report, the Opportunity Myth. Side note, we're working on another one coming out in the future. But our last national report in the Opportunity Myth, what we found was that students were doing the work that was given to them, but oftentimes it was not on grade level. And what we found within that data set was that when teachers were creating their own materials, they were always of lesser quality in terms of rigor than what the district was providing, even when the district wasn't providing what we would define, as Lily said, as HQIM. So we see this phenomenon that, like Denise is saying, like, we're putting all this time and energy. I think in our data we saw it was 20 extra hours a week on average. We're putting all this time and energy into finding materials to teach, and then yet, by and large, those materials aren't meeting the demands of grade level standards and what we would consider to be rigorous and evidence-based. So we've certainly seen that organizationally, and then personally, I would say, similar to Lily, I got my start in Baltimore. I taught in Michigan prior to coming to Baltimore as a middle school ELA teacher. And I was very, very fortunate to be engaged in a partnership in my graduate work with Johns Hopkins University. So I was actually learning curriculum design and how to design great units. And so I looped with a group of students from 6th grade to 7th grade to 8th grade. They still wish me happy birthday. Many of them, they're out of college now. This was a long time ago, but they were my kiddos and had been learning to build these curriculum units, right? So even we're talking about a teacher who has the privilege of being able to do that through the support. Well, when I went to visit them, when they were in 11th grade, I had to step into the hallway and have a moment because they had not grown at all from the work that they were doing in my 8th grade classroom. And in that moment, I really began my curriculum evangelist journey, because even if you as a teacher are phenomenal and can have the supports like I had to put great materials in front of kids that you're creating and that people are helping you build in your teaching, you can't teach them for 12 years. And so at some point you have to have some sort of standard of coherence, that a standard of care, as we've been calling it in Aldine, that all kids are going to get. And so for me, that always resonates when I think about the why here. So I'm typing the next question into the chat, and this one I'll call on you first, Janice. I'll keep track of the batting order after I get it out here. As you guys just spoke to, one idea that we've learned in the field is that curriculum or high quality instructional materials are what we would say are necessary, but ultimately insufficient in moving the needle for students, right? Just one tool, one lever to help you meet that vision that Matt was talking about. What other levers are necessary in an improvement strategy? And perhaps you could each talk to Janice. You work at a national level now, but you've also worked at the district and school level. Matt, obviously you have the perspective of a campus and district leader. And then Dr. Lux, you have this perspective at the state level. So what are those other levers that are necessary in your improvement strategy in addition to those high quality materials?
Great. I'll take that then and leave some space for Matt to take the district leadership piece. I'll hit it from the publisher piece, really, right? Because I think the piece you hit earlier is it makes my blood boil to think that HQIMs or all HQIMs are created equal, and they're not, right? We've with Curriculum Matters have done some work and we identified it as basal bloat, right? There's so much in some of the curricula that it actually doesn't help teachers, right? It just gives them more things to do. And so one of the things that I think, there are a number of really strong partners and programs out there. One of the reasons I joined Amplify was because of the stance they take as a publishing group, right? It's this idea of their mission and vision is to create high quality materials for teachers and for students. So this idea around, we also have to have systems and structures in place with the curricula to be able to support that work, right? So what does professional learning look like? It has to be educative in the build and the design of the curriculum so that teachers, as we know, we've all heard it today a million times, and we know it deeply, that curriculum includes both the skills and the knowledge build. And to get that, that's new for some teachers, right? I mean, the science of reading, thank goodness, has become the hot buzzword, but it's been around, but people have internalized it in different ways. So the idea that we expect every teacher to know exactly what to teach at any given moment, or whether we expect them to know the content of something that they're teaching, it's our responsibility to make sure that that's included in the materials so that teachers understand that. I also think that we have to think systematically about the structures that are in place. So what are those professional learning supports, thought partnership from groups like you, Kristen? You know, when I hear the work of what you all do in Aldine to really support the strategy that has to happen, the materials have to be rich enough for that study, right? The work to really unpack them, to have teachers do the things that they need to do in practice or in the at-bats that Aldine uses to really allow teachers to make sense of the work. You know, really considering the other piece you brought up earlier around equity, making sure that there's grade level, rigorous, Matt said it, joyful work that kids want to be engaged in. You know, nobody wants to do anything they don't like. So we want to make sure that kids have both that joy and that opportunity to really grow and even deepen their desires in learning. So I think we have to think about that and think also about the cohesiveness of what needs to happen. So the curriculum can't just be a beautiful thing to study. It actually has to align to standards because that's what folks are held accountable for. There have to be assessment tools that fit right in, you know, that go along and really measure what you're looking at. One of the things that I love most about my new job is working with the people that I do, because they're deep embedded in continuous improvement. They are wanting to know from the experts, not from, you know, the leading literacy expert. They want to know from the teacher who's teaching the third grade unit on Monday, how the heck did that go? did we meet the target? Did we get what we need? So really that constant opportunity to study what we're doing, and then most importantly, adjust based on that expertise. So being able to bring that into a full circle, I think is what we owe the field. And then making sure that as we collaborate and talk about things, just like we talk about in our classrooms in districts, that, you know, DEI work, diversity, equity, inclusion work isn't just a tagline. It is what everybody in the organization that you're supporting and working with believes. And it's what you see evident in the work that's turned out every single day. So to me, I think that's the big thing nationally we have to think about. And I think folks need to hold one another accountable for that. We need to not say everything's equal, and we need to say, this is falling down. This is what we need to do to support that. And I think that is, you know, something that we collectively as a unit owe all of our kids in every single content area that we touch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's been so important and come to light in our work as well, helping folks really, like you said, first step determining what is the HQIM and defining that. Lily, could you go next and layer in there?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to build on a couple ideas and things Janice just said. One, I think this concept, I think Janice, you just said it around students, you know, nobody wants to do something they don't like or they don't want to do. But I think this is hugely important too at the adult level and with these materials. And while we've mentioned not all materials are created equal, not all things are HQIM, even within HQIM, there's definitions, there are still, you know, great choices out there. And I think for districts and local entities to really decide what works best for them and fits their local context and provides all this is huge. I think that building that buy-in and making sure that teachers and leaders and community members have a sense of why are we doing this and what are we doing? I know, and I know Matt will talk about this in a minute, but I think that why is so huge. And so, you know, I certainly have an opportunity to see the breadth and diversity of Texas. We have 1,200 school districts with a wide range of everything from, you know, languages spoken to size to all sorts of things that they're dealing with. And there are things that make, you know, certain materials a better fit for particular districts. But I think for all of them, that getting to the clear why and then being able to put in those aligned systems of support is so huge. So none of those work without all of the other pieces around how do you actually provide that implementation support. I'll also just briefly share, you know, certainly here at the agency, we disperse and help oversee the instructional materials allotment for the state. And we know that there are a lot of materials that are bought and very well intentioned that ultimately like never even leave boxes, let alone get to some of these other pieces that we're talking about. So I think that's one, you know, very square one operational piece, but then there's other pieces that I know the Aldine team has done behind the scenes as well, from scheduling, not just time for the materials, but time again, as Janice mentioned, for teachers to really internalize, to have that time to practice and understand the materials and to analyze the student work that's coming from the materials to make those right moves to support students. And then all of the professional learning just in that community that goes with it, I think are really huge. So I think those are the big ones that really come to mind, but I know that it's really ongoing work for everyone to say, you know, get back to that piece around what are we seeing in the student work? How are we making sure we're supporting our students in meeting these grade level expectations? And what else do we need, you know, to be able to do this more effectively, which is something we're always really interested to listen to from the state level. I'll add one more thing, and then I know Matt has lots to add. I know we've all sort of said this implicitly, but I think we know, you know, it's not that teachers or any of us were, you know, teaching leveled readers because we didn't want what was best for kids. We just thought that was what was best for kids right at the time. And I think this piece is so huge because we know, you know, teachers, again, as James mentioned earlier, are such phenomenal leaders and people and, you know, do so much. And so I think, again, helping them to see that this tool isn't about taking away teacher autonomy, but continuing to really provide for them that support that allows them to serve their students more effectively is just a really big piece of this.
Thank you so much, Lily. Yeah, I have to say, we at TNTP have a lot of admiration for TEA as some of the other state departments we work with, because, and embedded in what you're saying, what we've seen as a trend is TEA is really asking the question, how can we make it easier for our LEAs to do the right things and to do the right work the right way, and really centering a lot of the resources you're providing and leadership you're providing on that. So from me to you, from us to you, thank you for centering that in your work.
Well, thank you. I'll just quickly add, and again, hopefully teeing up Matt with this, but I think, we are eager and happy to talk about some of the thornier issues. Jimmy's mentioned the assessment system is huge in this. And so talking about all these pieces and how does this all fit together? I mean, this is, again, all about making sure that our students have access to the best that's going to set them up for success. And so I think, having real conversations about how can we make sure that these systems truly align to do what's best for students is essential in this work.
Yeah, thank you for taking that on. It's not easy. Matt, what do you have to say?
Well, ditto to everything they said so eloquently. I'll try to add something as well to that pool. I think one of the most important things I heard though is having a communication strategy, and I think within that is the mindset that Lily was referring to. There's a technical change, and that was that professional learning, the first piece of it with this adoption of curriculum adoption. But the adaptive change is one of the bigger pieces here. This is a paradigm shift, and you really have to do that why. You really have to have that buy-in, and it's not a one and done. You can't just do it the first wave and say, okay, we've told you the why. It's a constant reminder of the why and why it's so important. That's why this conference is so great. It's the middle of the year, times are hard, as Lily referred, testing's coming up. The testing is a necessity in the state, we get it, but it's there. So how does it work in tandem with this process? How is not a distractor or whatever? The why is still there. You have to keep throwing it out there so that the adaptive change, the more important the why we're doing this, is always still prevalent. So then the communication plan is just constant. How are you going to keep that moving, make sure all stakeholders understand their part in that? Because you have the principal supervisors, you have the principals, you have the teachers, the specialists. Each of them have their own messaging that they need to hear really frequently and clearly so that everyone knows what's really happening. Then there is the professional learning strategy. You have the curriculum onboarding, then you have the just-in-time trainings, then you have the refresher trainings, then you have the deeper trainings. So being really strategic to make sure that people are constantly having their bucket filled with the right pieces, that's really necessary so that it can really keep the momentum going and people feel like they can do the work, because people can't take this all on once. I mean, even the best curriculum where it's tangible, it's still a change. And so you have to give it to them in bite-sized chunks. You have to say, this is what you're going to tackle here. Try this. We're going to come back to you in a few weeks and you're going to try this. And you're in the ongoing supports and coaching to where it's manageable. And then year 2, give yourself some grace. You're not going to do it perfectly year 1. Here's year 2. This is what you're going to try to accomplish here, year 3. And realize you're playing a long game, because it's not going to be perfect year 1, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and then it will get better. And then it will get better, and then it will get better. And then within that, that's going to bring you to the other pieces of setting the higher expectations. We heard during the panel, if y'all were participating in heard the Aldine ISD panel just a moment ago, you kind of realize what kids can do. And you understand that kids can talk about photosynthesis in kindergarten in the right context. And then, in first grade, they could identify the parts of the body and say, oh, your esophagus fell off when you're dressed with the body parts, and they know these things and say correctly. Because you're changing your paradigm of what kids can do at that age. And that's important because you're setting your higher expectations, and all that stuff comes with the right plan and the right action changes. But those are levers that take time. So I would say communication and professional learning.
Absolutely. So summing that up, we heard a lot here. Like the first is, and I'm going to miss some of these, but to sum it up, the first is like, you've got to get the right vision in place, the right why. Like, why are we doing this? You have to get the HQIM, the right kind of HQIM. So it's about selecting the right tool for you. And then, as we spoke to, pairing that with the adaptive change of high expectations. And I would say, Matt spoke to it, high quality professional learning, shifting from, as I said before, shifting from 4 times a year training on instructional strategies to really embedding studying the curriculum into the practices are all levers that we at TNTP have gotten to be a part of as partners, and we're really grateful for it. I will add one layer that might be interesting to folks. Somebody asked me last week, actually, they said, so much of our work at TNTP for the past couple of years has been on helping folks get the right literacy vision and helping them get the right materials, these levers in place. And so I was asked, well, what next? Because once the districts we're partnering with have that vision, have that strategy in place, is there a place for us still to partner with them And my answer to that, I think that the 2.0 is the continuous improvement piece that Matt spoke to. And I want to highlight something that Lily said. So often materials sit on the shelf when you adopt them, and you wouldn't believe how many district leaders I ask, to what degree are we implementing materials around here? And they don't really have a solid answer. So I've learned a lot in recent years about program evaluation, and that you can really use program evaluation and progress monitoring to answer that question and answer it confidently, right? Get a sample population of classrooms, get some observers in there and capture it. To what degree are we implementing this curriculum? Because the first step is getting it in teachers' hands and getting it launched. And so that is a place where I know it can be really tough for districts to do that work on their own. And so that's a place where I think partnerships with organizations like ours, it doesn't have to be that our organization is partnering with you in the professional learning. We certainly like doing that, but I think there's also a space to bring in partners just around the progress monitoring and the program evaluation to know to what degree your plan is playing out as intended. And so moving into our next question, and I'll hand this one over to Lily first this time. And I see your question in the chat, Gail. I'm going to get to that at the end. So in thinking of some of the levers that we just discussed, can you share some examples of where you've seen this done really well? It could be the district, school, or classroom level. I love this question because I'm always mining for examples, and I have many, but I want to hear from you all. What does it look like and sound like, and what can we learn from it when we find those places that are really getting it right? So I'll hand that to you, Lily.
Well, I was a little bit torn. I've had a chance actually to be out to Aldine a couple times lately, and there's obviously a lot to share there, but I know both through the rest of the day and then today, I think y'all are hearing quite a bit about Aldine. So I'll try to use another district I've been in lately. But again, there's many fantastic things to share. I think, much like you just summarized, Kristen, in terms of what's needed to really make this effective, going into districts where there has been a thoughtful top to bottom approach about the systems alignment is really where I've seen this thrive. And so that means not just, the teachers having the materials and having the professional time to internalize the materials and the professional learning that they need. Their coaches have that. Their coaches deeply understand the materials. Their coaches are giving aligned feedback and know what they're wrestling with in the materials and what the students are wrestling with. The principals know the same thing. The principal supervisors are on the same set of conversations, and the conversations at the cabinet level and even with the board are around data that's aligned to what they're seeing with that implementation and what they're seeing in terms of student progress. And, it maybe sounds simple when I say it that way, but I think everyone on this call knows that's huge. And that takes a lot of key communication. It takes a lot of coalescing around this why. And it takes a constant tweaking of structures to make sure that you're changing and moving things out that aren't necessarily working. I was in another district recently, and I had a chance to actually see some amplified materials in action. And I was with the teacher coach who was, telling me this was a teacher who had just some really interesting struggles before using these materials. And she was able to give me this great example of how using these materials and working with her coach had transformed her classroom and show me in terms of actual student progress. And then you think about that in terms of what it means for the district as well, with teacher retention and other pieces. And it was a fantastic example of both systems alignment with like a really concrete coaching story. So I think that is what comes to mind immediately.
Absolutely. Matt, I'll ask you next for this one.
So I think I can speak on a very more specific focus at a district level. And, I think what we do is I can use illustrations of ways we do it, systems that we do, like Lily was referring to. And, one of the ways we do that, when you say looks like, sounds like, it's one of the examples we have is what we call collective learning. And collective learning is the way we keep our administrators informed of what they should be looking and hearing, seeing, and understanding what's happening in the classrooms. And our approach to that is the first Friday of every month, we bring all of our leaders together and we talk about this is what should be happening in your classroom. This is what literacy leadership is now at this time with this new way forward in literacy. And we give them the tools for them to support their teachers in this new journey. And then they can it goes into our new structures around what we now call PLCs, or curriculum-based professional learning. We call them CBPLs. And we created very specific structures that should be happening during CBPLs to really support the implementation of the high quality instruction materials. So it's all very tangible about what should be happening, and everyone's really informed about what those practices are. It's not a guessing game. Everyone's really clear that there are 4 protocols that should happen with CBPLs to support the implementation of high quality instruction materials. And our literacy leaders understand that because they're seeing that during during the collective learnings. So really specific structures drive that, and the communication channel is really strong because everyone knows what we're talking about and using the same common language and terminology.
Absolutely. Janice, what would you say?
Here I come for cleanup. So, after great insights from both of my partners here, I think we've talked about lots of C words, right? The codification being important, continuous improvement, coherence. I want to hit collaboration. And so for me, that is a big one, especially from stepping outside of a district into some national work with partners. I think Lily hit it earlier. There's not one curriculum that fits for every single district, right? So this piece around how districts are collaborating with each other to learn from each other around, how do you set a vision, right? A vision is a nice piece of paper. Everybody's got a cute tagline that hits 6 different things and, rhymes or does whatever it does to entice people. But does it really say what you're expecting to see change? Matt hit it earlier, right? It's technical change, but it's also adaptive change. And how is the leadership, Lily hit this, how is the leadership building that coherence across their design from start to finish? And, beyond the vision, how are you getting folks engaged in the vision as well? So are teachers having a voice in that? Are parents having a voice? Community members? Really helping us define what needs to happen. We did that in Baltimore, right? This engagement process. How do you get folks to really not just say it, but own it and believe it? And then I think Matt hit another point around that implementation guide, bringing the implementation in a way that allows people the space and time to embrace the change, to be coached through the change. Lily hit it by talking about, a CEO that is fighting and learning for the same thing that the classroom teacher is learning, and being willing to be humble and transparent in, we're all learning this, so we're going to do it together, is also a critical feature in that. But I think it's also part of that long game Matt talked about, right? Early on, when we brought in HQIMs and first started talking about it, it was, you have to do this, then you have to do this, then you have to do this. We need to be much more forward thinking. So what's 3 years of implementation look like? What's that lift going to take? What's the PD look like for a teacher? What's the PD look like for a school leader? How are we measuring that along the way to say, guess what? We thought teachers would need this on March 19th, but really they're struggling. We might have to do this, or they've already got it. We can skip and go forward. So really thinking about that PD work. There's amazing organizations out there that help us with that. So folks like you, folks like Rivet, who are helping people just understand, how do you develop a professional development guide, and a plan in that. So I think the other part for me is just seeing the number of folks, one, coming here on a Saturday, right, to engage in this work, but it's the folks that, when we started in Baltimore, Sumner came to us and said, can we visit? And now Sumner has people visiting them. Aldine has people visiting them. So this kind of collaboration, I think, is just critical for all of us to build confidence, to build voice, and really to build demand for the field for what our kids deserve.
I love that. Collaboration is what it looks like. And Sabrina Johnson put in the chat, hi, Sabrina, thanks for sharing that. An example of that collaboration. And we've seen that again and again, the need to communicate across principal supervisors, curriculum and academics office, right? In Aldine, many people know one of my very favorite people in Aldine is Dr. Martha Escalante, who is the Executive Director of Family and Community Engagement, who actually in her parent newsletters will say, hey, want to know what your kids are learning about this month in 2nd grade? And she'll talk about some of those things that you spoke about, Matt, some of that really cool stuff. I think I can do this. I hadn't planned on it, but I'm going to just share my screen for 1 second. Can you see that student work there? So Lily talked about student work, so I wanted to share this. I think also to answer that question, what it looks like is you start to see student work look like this. So I know I have permission to share this because this is from my son, Brooks, who is dyslexic and has a whole host of other learning differences, which you can see in that circled word Ferschen. He has a hard time hearing the difference between and f. But I love that error in this. He's only in 2nd grade. I love that error in this because it shows that he was doing the work. And if you look at this piece of student work, he's actually doing a comparative analysis of Keats and Lester's different versions of John Henry in 2nd grade. So reaping some of the benefits of Janice Lane's leadership of around curriculum in Baltimore, because he's a Baltimore City Schools student. I think, seeing is believing. And when we start to see our students do this, and not just students, our gifted and talented students, right? What does that even mean? Like seeing all of our students do this, seeing our students across the board do that kind of heavy lifting and work, hearing them. I was in Aldine earlier this week, and I heard a group of 8th graders arguing about linear equations. I know this is a literacy conference, but can I tell you, it made my heart sing to hear them go back and forth about linear equations. And I was like, you can't tell me that our kids aren't interested in this kind of rigorous work, because they are. We just have to raise the bar for them. So I love that. It looks like all the things we've named. It looks like collaboration. And if you're really looking to see it, look no further than the students themselves, because they'll show us the way if we let them to. So anyway, next question, and then we're going to build a little bit of time for questions from the group here. One of the ideas that comes up over and over again, and I'll tee this one up to you first, Matt. When we discuss the role of curriculum, is what I was just getting at a little bit earlier with that student work example, is that equity follows as a result of holding the same high expectations for students across the board for core instruction. Can you speak a little bit about why that's important and what leaders at the classroom, district, state level should keep in mind when thinking about equity and students who have historically been on the margins in crafting a literacy improvement strategy?
Yeah, and I think we've touched upon it in some of the other answers, but I think one thing I would say here, and I might be butchering what was so eloquently said by Tracy Whedon earlier, is, a zip code should not define your level of success. That should not have any reason why it should prove what you're capable of doing. And so oftentimes that seems to be the measure. We don't give enough credit to what kids can do, and kids can do really hard things, no matter who you are or where you came from. And when you have these materials, it forces you to come to reckoning with that, because kids can do this work no matter what their background is. And it gives them the foundation to do so. It's amazing how quickly kids grow with these materials, and teachers come to realization they can do this. They can read the complex text. They can use this vocabulary and context, and they actually enjoy it. It doesn't matter what their background is, EL, special education, they can thrive with it. And so this makes it happen. And it really is the teachers that come to the realization after the kids. The kids get it. Their kids are willing to jump in right away. They have no problems when they see the 3, 5, 10, whatever pages you're asking to put in front of them. It's the teachers who are going to push back first and say they can't do it. But when they start seeing it happening and grow quickly and achieve great results, it spreads like fire and people really buy into it. Where we really started seeing a wave of success was when teachers and kindergarten teachers it's usually kindergarten teachers and high school teachers that are the ones who are the most reluctant to change. I don't know why that is. It just, every district you go into, they're going to say the same things. But it was our kindergarten teachers who, again, they were a little reluctant, but when they were the ones who started seeing their kids reading by mid-year last year, started saying, okay, we're buying into this, because they were able to see successes. That's why this matters. It's kids that they had never had reading by Christmas were reading, because they were getting the right kind of reading lessons that they needed. And it was equitable across all classrooms. It wasn't because they had the best teacher. They had the right materials and the right training, the right equipment to do so. And it worked.
Yeah, I'll never forget when I got a text from Demedia Edwards, who was with us, and she had, and Janice, you spoke to this a little bit, like you really have to have courage in all of this. And so when I'd been doing this work with Aldine, they had so much courage in enacting this plan, but I think there was still a little bit of nervousness, like, is this really going to work? This huge bet that we're making. And Demedia texts me in early October. And so we were just like a little bit more than a month or so into the adoption and the implementation of this vision and strategy. And she's like, kindergartners are reading. Like, I'm hearing them read, and it's amazing. Like, oh my gosh, we're on the right track. So couldn't agree more, and agree with something that Lily, you said earlier, which is that our teachers are so hardworking and amazing across the board. And I will just layer in, before I turn it to you, Janice, to respond to this question about equity as well, is one thing that I've experienced is that many teachers actually feel some level of guilt when they, this happened with one of my very favorite teachers that I'm become close friends with. She started to see the kids, she's a kindergarten teacher, reading in October and November. And she felt a certain level of guilt, right? Like, I've been teaching the wrong way for so long, and I feel like those kids should get their money back. Like, what, and really having sort of almost an existential crisis because it's a tough truth to grapple with. But just as the Lieben said earlier today, as we all said, we have to give ourselves some grace and say, know better, do better. And I think I name it because I think it's important for all of us as leaders, classroom teachers who are leaders, coaches, principals, district leaders, to keep in mind that there is sometimes an emotional response to even the positive things that come out of this work, and to keep that in mind. And with that, Janice, I'll let you respond as well.
Yes, I think this one's a tough one, right? Because I think it's also a fine balance. So it's almost, you said it from earlier, you have to be courageous, but I also think you also have to be unapologetically focused, that you can't let go of what you're working on. Because in a district, in a state, anywhere, there are 7,000 directions you could go at any given moment, because everything is a crisis, because we're thinking about the most important things in front of us as our kids. And I think for this, it is making sure, I say it all the time, it's one of my favorite things to say, is you have to create the guardrails around the work that you're doing, so that when folks want to make that left turn, you got to bring them back to the center and say, this is what we agreed upon. This is our plan. This is where we're going. And I say that, and I said, it's hard to balance, because you've got to be that, but you also have to be empathetic to change and what people are learning. So you have to be a people watcher, an observer, a listener. You have to be in the work. So you have to be in classrooms. You have to be inside those circles. And, just as you said, Kristen, with that empathy piece, it's so big, right? When I look back at my career, we all followed Calkins because it was what we thought we needed to do. And, to be able to say, at that moment, that was what I needed to do for kids. But now, knowing what I know that we need to do a lot more. And so as we continue to grow, you've heard 60,000 iterations of that, of people talking about medical degrees, whatever. You don't want to drive a 1970 car that you're not servicing and updating and doing new things to across the country. We shouldn't do that for what we're doing with our instruction too. And what we've got to do is be vulnerable in that. I think the amazing thing about this conference for me is the continuity of threading that you're hearing throughout, right? You heard it from the Liebens, you heard it in the opening, you're hearing it here, you're hearing it from this story. It's that continuous improvement of really studying, what are we doing? How do we support people? But you have to stay focused, because if you continue to turn left and right, we never stay to the time that we need for teachers to internalize the materials. Lily talked about it earlier, for the principal supervisors to be able to supervise people through that. And then the next thing you know, something comes out and, the data is not what we want, and automatically we make a left turn. And I think we're in an amazing place for the first time in a long time with HQIMs in the work, but we're also in one of the scariest places, because our data is going to be coming back real, and it's going to be coming back soon with gaps in instruction, virtual, non-virtual. And what we have to do again is stay focused. So we've got to figure out and use those improvement strategies to name what the issues are, versus saying, oh, now we've got gobs of money and we should try this, right? So I think that is the piece of really, really staying focused and making sure that you've got your ear to the ground on all of those stakeholder groups to make sure that the decisions you're making are informed.
I love that. Yeah, stay focused, stay the course, trust the process, and then tinker with the process. Not veer left, tinker with it, right? Like in that name of and pursuit of continuous improvement. Lily, what can you add?
Kristen, I appreciate you've changed the batting order. So, but as usual, I want to just co-sign everything my fellow panelists have said. I mean, I think there's so much important insight in these last comments, and I think about both focus and empathy as being huge. I also do want to just come back, Kristen. I love that you shared that student work sample. Like, I think that actually is, to me, when I think about this question and I think about, you know, what high quality instructional materials can mean for every student in the state, it really is this access to grade level work, this access to, I think about Dr. Goffney words, if you can read, you can go anywhere, right? This idea that this is so crucial for all of our students, and it's a little different for each of them of what they need and what the supports and scaffolds look like. And we need to make sure that we have the tools to set up and then do that analysis and then make sure that we're using the materials to support that level of expectation. I'm sure, and Matt can speak to this at the district level, other things, you know, we often hear even just big picture that the materials, it's too much, it's too fast, right? And so to Janice's point about focus and holding the line, I think this combination of, you know, what are the things we really need to do to make this easier, make this successful, make sure that this is going well? And then how do we make sure we're being really clear and holding the line to say that edit actually is one that is going to end up lowering the opportunity that you provide students because they actually can do that pace, or they can do that assignment, or they can do it with this scaffolding. And so I just think that's a huge piece. And I do think it takes, you know, thinking about what can we be doing at the state or the national level, it takes seeing those examples. You have to see the student work, you have to see classrooms where it's happening, you have to see districts who are making it happen successfully. And that's why I think, you know, conferences like this, site visits and other things are just so powerful. So folks know, you know, it's not that I don't believe this is possible, you know, because I don't believe in kids. It's just that I have never seen it. I don't know that this is going to work. And so I think being able to see that is huge and is a big part of what we all as leaders in this work need to help provide people, is that opportunity to see, to know and do better from, like, you know, we knew something, but now we actually see, here are some really incredible examples of what all our students can do. And we need to make sure everyone knows that and has access to it.
Yeah, I love that. I don't think she's in the room with us, but one of our friends in the work, Dr. Kantu, who's an amazing assistant superintendent, or school assistant superintendent in Aldine. When we first set out on this journey, we went into some classrooms in Lenore City, Tennessee. So shout out to Lenore City. And it was a classroom full of multilingual learners. Many of them were newcomers. I think it was a second grade classroom, and the kids were having a fervent debate about different types of bird species. And they were jotting in their notes and talking back and forth to one another. And she looked at me and said, I can't unsee that. I can't unsee that because I have not been able to see that level, like seeing that level with kids who look like me, that I care about so much, that is my why in this work. I can't unsee it. And I now need to work to make sure that that happens. And she has been carrying the torch in that work for us throughout her career, but especially in this work. So I completely agree. I think seeing what it looks like in action, all of us have had those moments, and it can be really inspiring and reinvigorate us in this work that's really tough. I'm going to paste your question, Gail Morrison. Hopefully, Gail, you're still with us. I'm chuckling because Gail and I earlier in the week were talking about some, we agree, Janice, we love seeing pictures of like student work posted online, seeing what the kids look like, but there was one, we won't tell you who, there was one, there was some student work that was posted from nobody who's here. And it was like fifth graders. And she was like, this looks remarkably similar to the work that you were retweeting kindergartners doing in Baltimore City earlier in the week. And I was like, yeah, it is unfortunately all too similar. Hey, Gail. So she asked this question in the chat, and I'm curious if dealer's choice, any of you can respond to this. She said she hears from teachers who want change like this and who feel discouraged and demoralized and say, I keep asking for this. I keep asking for these kinds of materials and this kind of professional learning, but I don't, it goes unheard. What would you say to teachers who maybe don't have the positionality and privilege to make those choices, who want to do this kind of work? What ideas do you have for them? Great question, Gail.
To jump in briefly, I think my instinct in any of these is to ask Gail. I have all these clarifying questions for you, so you know, about context and things. You know, but there's a couple of things we're doing at the state to try to support folks broadly, and one of them is making this open source and available to teachers, right? So instead of going on to Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers, you should have access to all of these materials. And it's not, you know, everything, it doesn't get to those aligned systems, but I think we have actually seen, we have examples in Texas where a couple teachers have actually started using materials and been able to be that proof point in their school and convince their parents, their students and their leadership to actually adopt something more broadly. So again, you know, I'm sure that is an overly simplistic answer, and I would love to dive in more, but that's certainly something we want to make sure is possible so that everyone has access, and that isn't a barrier that you have to wait for your district to make a purchase or do something so that teachers can have access. And again, I know your district might have a separate scope and sequence or a separate, you know, lots of caveats.
Yeah, no, and thank you for that, Lily. I mean, I think we're such huge fans at TNTP of states like Texas and Tennessee, and we're seeing this happening increasingly. State departments trying to create open source materials for teachers so that they have access to them and maybe can get permission to pilot something even in a classroom, right? And see what happens and see how that can work. Matt, Janice, anything you want to add as well?
Matt, you want to go?
No, go ahead.
Okay, I would just add that I think, you know, joining learning opportunities to learn more so that they can become informed in how they can message things broader, right? So whether that is joining opportunities like this today, I know as I was looking through sessions, you know, you could look at certain sessions that were teacher focused. There were a couple in this same session where there are 100 and some, you know, participants in there. So it's amazing to see how teachers are doing their own exploration and get connected with other people. So learn what other folks are doing, you know, how they can communicate it, and start having those conversations wherever and whenever you can have them. You know, some districts don't have the luxury to pilot or try things on their own because there's a one way or a one, you know, system in their state or in their district. So just having some of those conversations. Part of the work we did with Curriculum Matters was it started in one of the districts we went to go visit on one of the knowledge tours. It started with a principal doing some reading and then having a conversation with the teachers in her school. And then they tried one little thing, and then that had great outcomes. They changed one more thing. Then they went to their state department. So, you know, there's all different ways to do it. And I would just say, try to explore those open options that are out there for you to connect and learn more.
Yeah, so shout out to TEA and states who are making these open source materials. Also shout out, like you're saying, Janice, to folks like Curriculum Matters, folks like Aldine ISD who put on a free literacy conference open to everyone. I guarantee you it was not free because they're spending a lot of their time and energy and some of their funds on this, right? So that spirit of generosity is out there. Take advantage of it and start small. I love that. Matt, final thoughts before I close this out.
You know, know better, do better. That's what I would say. This is an awesome opportunity. And as you learn things, give yourself some grace as you try out this journey, and celebrate the wins, because there's going to be lots of them, but you're playing the long game. Celebrate the small wins so that you can stay focused and, you know, tackle the big things.
Absolutely. Janice, any final thoughts, final messages to folks in the arena doing this hard work?
I would just say, you know, be vulnerable that you're a learner in it, you know, that you're side by side with folks learning it. Be okay to screw it up, because we do. You know, be okay to figure out that you might need to lean on someone else who's done it. But I think the other part of it, just like we've talked before, find the joy in the work, because that's what the work is about, right? There are amazing folks doing this. Today's an example of it. You know, I've had the pleasure of working with Matt, working with you, but now I've expanded my group to Lily, as well as other folks that have been messaging back and forth here. So just, you know, continue your own learning, because I think it's a journey we're never finished with.
Yeah. Lily, any final thoughts for the group, for the folks doing the hard work?
Just to express, you know, so much gratitude to everyone who has joined today and who's out there doing this. I mean, you know, again, and a huge thank you to Aldine ISD for doing this. And I think, Kristen, you just said it, this is not free. This is a lot of work that folks have put in. And this is so important for keeping that why and helping folks continue to learn on this journey. And so just incredible gratitude for all the hard work everyone is doing and for folks joining on a Saturday and for the collaboration and the effort that's really going into making a difference for kids.
And I just want to close by sharing gratitude for my panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your time and insights. Really grateful, and really grateful to everyone in the room for listening and participating and joining in. Amanda, do you want to share any final thoughts? I think we have one last session, right?
Yep, we're wrapping up and going to go another session. I just want to say thank you to the whole panel. Thank you, Kristen, for, moderating it and leading that discussion and kind of tying up the ends and the beginnings of each question. We surely appreciate all of you and wish you to have a great afternoon. This conference would not be successful without leaders like you donating your time and chiming in on what's going across our nation. So thank you all and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.